Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. As Friday's Trump-Putin meeting approaches, the Russian offensive in eastern Ukraine is ramping up. Breaches of Ukrainian defense lines are reported, and our correspondent is on the ground to bring us the details. More on that in just a moment, but before we dive in, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. President Trump says a land swap might be in the cards for Ukraine and Russia. What is the Hungarian opposition leader's opinion on support for Ukraine? And 63 foreign nationals will have to leave Poland as a result of their actions during a rap concert in Warsaw. Russia appears to be attempting to break through Ukrainian defenses ahead of peace talks between U.S. President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Analysts suggest that Kremlin's forces have managed to punch through north of the town of Pokrovsk, with Ukraine sending urgent reinforcements to the area. Our correspondent, Alex Kadier, has been speaking to Ukrainian military commanders and joins me now from Kyiv. So, good evening, Alex. How serious is this Russian advance and why now?
Good evening, Claudia. Well, it has the potential to be very serious indeed. The latest we have from Ukrainian forces on the ground is that this advance has so far been partially contained and some ground has been regained. Let's show you exactly what that looks like, how it's looked like in the last few hours. You see this part of eastern Ukraine, this Ukrainian defensive line being pierced along a line of about 15 to 17 kilometers by small Russian forces. We understand they were either on foot or by light vehicles. Now, why does that matter? As you said, it is north of the town of Pokrovsk, which the Ukrainians and the Russians have been fighting over for months now, and also has the potential to cut off a key road from Dobropilya up to the heavily fortified city of Kramatorsk. Now, of course, that fortified city and the neighboring city of Sloviansk, very much part of that Ukrainian defense for the rest of the country, hence the concern with this advance. Now, I put these questions to Andriy Onistrat, who is a senior commander for the Ukrainian armed forces. I asked him exactly how tough this new Russian attack is.
The situation on the front is difficult, physically demanding. I can say that the Ukrainian military is plugging the gaps that periodically appear, and we managed to close them somehow. Overall, the worst situation is mostly to the north of Pokrovsk, where the Russians find weak points to penetrate and carry out attacks. The situation is tough, but under control.
So clearly a dynamic, fluid situation on that front line. And your first question, of course, Claudia, was why now? Well, because it is, of course, ahead of that meeting between President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Alaska on Friday. Russia, it seems, trying to capitalize on any gains to gain more leverage in those negotiations, to prove perhaps to their American counterparts that they have the upper hand. Well, I put that very same question to the military commander, the Ukrainian commander, about what expectations he has from the Trump-Putin meeting.
I don't really expect anything. If something happens, I take it more as a positive surprise than something I was waiting for. I know Putin has no intention of stopping the conflict. I've heard a little about attempts to trade a ceasefire for territorial concessions. That's ridiculous and won't be accepted. It will be difficult and the struggle will continue. As for Donald Trump convincing Putin to stop the war, there is some possibility, but I'm not sure it will work after this summit.
And Claudia, that rejection of territorial concessions reiterated by President Zelensky earlier today, saying he simply cannot give up the Donbass, cannot give up Donetsk. It is not his to give. It is part of the Ukrainian nation. Again, rejecting any concept of large-scale territorial concessions from the Ukrainian side, backing up what that military commander just said moments ago. So low expectations from the Ukrainian side. I've been speaking to other officers who said very clearly they will continue their work, they will continue their fight, irrespective of the politics going on overhead. Claudia.
And so the fight continues. Thank you so much, Alex. That was Alex Kadier reporting live from Kyiv. Ukraine and Russia might have to swap some territories in order to end the war, U.S. President Donald Trump has said. As Trump is getting ready to meet with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, on Friday, Europe and Kyiv are increasingly concerned with what will be the outcome of that conversation. Kazimierz Wysiak has this report.
Thank you. Thank you. Ahead of the historic meeting between US President Donald Trump and the Russian leader Vladimir Putin on Friday, the former is as ambiguous about his goals as ever.
I think it'll be good, but it might be bad.
And it's precisely that attitude from the US president that's making his Ukrainian and European partners anxious about that meeting.
This is really a feel-out meeting, a little bit. And President Putin invited me to get involved. He wants to get involved. I believe he wants to get it over with.
As President Trump also vaguely mentioned that Ukraine and Russia might have to swap territories to end the fighting, questions are rising over his understanding of the root cause of the conflict.
Ukraine has been bravely defending its own territory, and there is very little chance / no chance that President Zelensky will give up. So I think whoever believes that peace through trade will bring peace to Ukraine is sorely mistaken.
With these concerns in mind, Europe and Kyiv are scrambling to get the US leader to secure Ukraine's best interests. On Wednesday, they're set to meet with President Trump on a video call to do just that.
It is really a fundamental issue from the point of view of Polish security that Putin should not get a gift before these talks, before this meeting. And such a gift for Putin would certainly be to conflate Ukrainians and Poles, or Ukraine more broadly with Europe.
U.S. Special Envoy Keith Kellogg was to visit Warsaw and Kyiv this week, but he cancelled the trip last minute. Kellogg is considered to be more wary of Russia than any other Trump advisor, so he could play a crucial role in convincing the US president to put more pressure on Putin.
They got in touch with Trump administration officials, such as the Ukraine envoy Keith Kellogg, and they were able to get a measure of US political support and now even military support for Ukraine's resistance. Think about the fact that whereas the Trump administration had cut military aid completely to Ukraine, now the US is selling weapons to European partners who then transfer them to Kyiv.
Kellogg's cancellation could be the result of the Wednesday video call summit taking place. This will be one of the last opportunities for Europe and Ukraine to talk strategy with the US president before his meeting with Putin. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
And ahead of the talks in Alaska, EU countries issued a statement in support of Ukraine, signed by all member states except Hungary. With Orbán's government hesitant of backing Ukraine's cause, Péter Magyar, the leader of the Hungarian opposition, presents himself as an alternative. But is his position towards Kyiv that different? Sonia Gatapiszczan reports.
EU members showed a united front in welcoming Donald Trump's efforts to end Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine through a statement ahead of his Friday meeting with Vladimir Putin. All but one, Hungary, opted out.
It's nothing new. Also, it's nothing new that we need unity to be strong. And if we don't have this unity, there's only one party that will profit from this, and this is Russia.
Hungary's reserved stance toward Ukraine has been closely associated with the country's Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán.
The accession of Ukraine to the European Union cannot be allowed now.
Orbán has long blocked EU's efforts to support Ukraine, whereas his political party, the ruling Fidesz, even ran a large-scale campaign to discourage Hungarians from supporting Ukraine's EU accession bid. But ahead of the 2026 elections, a July poll shows the opposition party TISA at the top, with its leader Péter Magyar seen as a possible candidate for prime minister.
Unless something very dramatic happens, we are in for a change of government in Hungary. His departure from the policy line of Viktor Orbán will not be radical. There will be a big difference will be in the fact that TISA and Magyar himself are essentially pro-EU and are pro-European.
While Magyar, a lawyer by profession, and his party TISA may be more pro-European, their stances on Ukraine may not be drastically different from Orbán's.
TISA also maintains that it will not allow for the delivery of weapons to Ukraine via its territory, and also it will be somehow skeptical about the prospects of EU membership for Ukraine.
In an interview for Polish news outlet Gazeta Wyborcza, Magyar indicated the stained Ukraine-Hungary relations stem from issues surrounding the Hungarian minority in Zakarpattia and Kyiv's push to make Ukrainian the mandatory instruction language in public schools. While intended to bolster national identity, the move raised concerns over protecting minority languages, including Hungarian. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabishchan.
China and the U.S. have called a pause on a simmering trade war by postponing the implementation of triple-digit tariffs until early November. Despite this playing out across the world, one of EU's former trade negotiators has told TVP World that Brussels insiders are watching. Angela Skujins has more with this report.
I've been up here a lot. I've never seen a crowd.
Washington and Beijing have extended their tariff truce by 90 days, staving off triple-digit duties while they try to find a solution to a blistering trade war. This means that US tariffs on Chinese goods will not increase to 145% until November 10th, stabilising at 30%. China will also maintain its import duties on American goods at 30% instead of scaling up to 125%. US President Donald Trump announced the suspension late Monday night on his Truth Social account, with China's Commerce Ministry responding with their own parallel pause.
I have just signed an executive order that will extend the tariff suspension on China for another 90 days. All other elements of the agreement will remain the same.
While the pause creates breathing room for Beijing and Washington to secure an amicable deal, it sends strong signals to Europe. Within the heart of the European Union in Brussels, non-resident Bruegel Fellow Ignacio Garcia Berchecho said officials are monitoring the situation.
For the European Union, the main interest is how far these discussions are going to be tackling the type of structural problems that are a concern about the Chinese economic policies, issues like the role of state-owned enterprises, subsidies, overcapacities.
The former EU trade negotiator went on to tell TVP World that Europeans should be vigilant regarding how these discussions unfold, as it could give China unfettered access to the American market. But Trump's hawkish trade policies have also bolstered Brussels to shore up free trade deals with off-kilter allies, Berchecho said. This includes Australia.
I think it's important to see this agreement not only in terms of some narrowed benefits or some narrow sensitivities, but much more as an also a strategic investment by Australia and the European Union to strengthen its trade and investment relationship.
Spokespeople from Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and the European Commission told TVP World in separate statements that this time of global uncertainty has prompted both sides to restart talks. While there are high hopes that this deal could be finalised by the end of the summer, the European Union remains in the throes of hammering out the details of its own 15% tariff deal with the United States. Despite the optimism, however, there has been no pause forecasted for either. Angela Skujins for TVP World.
Thank you.
57 Ukrainians and 6 Belarusians will have to leave Poland. This is the aftermath of the controversial concert of Belarusian rapper Max Korsch, which took place in Warsaw over the weekend. Anastasia Yanchenko has the update on the story.
The Saturday performance of Belarusian rapper Max Korsch in Warsaw drew a crowd of over 60,000 fans, mainly from Ukraine and Belarus. For some of the attendees, however, the show ended with serious and irreversible consequences.
57 Ukrainians and 6 Belarusians will be required to leave the country, either voluntarily or by force. The courts acted swiftly, and in cases involving offences or serious misdemeanors, appropriate penalties were imposed.
A day before the performance, fans organised an unofficial warm-up event, shocking residents of Warsaw's Wola district.
An unregistered mass event took place at this location. Hundreds of people were there. The organizers failed to ensure proper security or report the event in accordance with applicable laws. There was very loud music and a huge crowd.
On the day of the performance, 129 people were arrested, with the prosecution opening as many as 40 court cases. The controversy, however, did not end there. Despite strict security checks and a ban on displaying national symbols in the audience, flags of the Ukrainian insurgent army, linked to crimes against the Polish population during World War II, were raised by some of the attendees.
This was the most thorough search I have ever experienced at a concert. They really checked everything, made you throw things away, even made girls throw away lip gloss. In the end, you could only go in with your phone.
The individual who managed to smuggle the forbidden flag into the show turned out to be Ukrainian and has already denounced his actions and apologized to the Polish people.
Nie miałem zamiaru wzbudzać negatywnych emocji. Flaga, którą trzymałem, była dla mnie symbolem wsparcia dla Ukraińców. Nie miałem nic wspólnego propagandowo.
According to experts and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, such tensions between Ukrainians and Poles play out into Russian hands.
Russia is doing everything it can to pit Kyiv against Warsaw. Anti-Polish gestures by Ukrainians and stirring up anti-Ukrainian sentiments in Poland are part of Putin's plan, executed by foreign agents and local idiots.
Research by Polish NGOs show that anti-Ukrainian sentiment is growing in Poland, with an increasing number of street clashes and media hostility, as well as a sharp rise in anti-Ukrainian content on social media.
The Polish nationalist far right uses the anti-Ukrainian sentiment to mobilize support.
The rise in anti-Ukrainian behaviours is used not only to serve local political interests, but also further Russia's goals. This report by TVP World's Anastasia Yanchenko.
Shortly after the show, Polish football champions Lech Poznań will take on Red Star Belgrade in the Champions League qualifiers rematch. Yet with the Serbian champions still sponsored by Gazprom, the game goes beyond the realm of sports. This next report is by Natalia Komarov.
Poland's current football champion Lech Poznań is about to play the second leg of Champions League qualifying round against Crvena Zvezda, also known as Red Star Belgrade. The Polish team is in for a challenge.
First, they lost the previous game 1-3 in Poznań, and the away match is more difficult for them. Second factor is that they are playing without the important midfielders, Filip Jagiełło and Ali Golizadek. And the third factor is about the atmosphere. 50,000 seats on the stadium in Serbia, called Maracana by the fans.
But the match involves a bigger issue than just sports. Red Star is sponsored by Russian energy giant Gazprom. The company used to be one of the sponsors of the Champions League competition until 2022, when UEFA broke off the deal following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
There isn't any specific sanction, as far as I'm aware, on Gazprom or such Russian companies sponsoring these teams, but rather it was considered perhaps the moral decision to make.
Moreover, the first leg of the game in Poznań had its own fair share of controversy. Fans of Lech decided to welcome the Serbian team by displaying a transparent with the words "Kosovo is Serbian." The gesture was welcomed by the Belgrade club. Red Star, or Crvena Zvezda, is the favorite football club of Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić. His support has allowed the Belgrade team to receive almost unlimited state funds, as well as donations from the largest state companies. Consequently, Crvena Zvezda remains Serbia's and possibly the Balkans' best football team. For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
And coming back to our top story of the day, with two major meetings that may change the course of the war in Ukraine. To talk about what lies ahead in the context of the Wednesday EU-Ukraine-US summit and the Trump-Putin meeting, I'm joined by Daniel Fried, former US ambassador to Poland. Good evening, Ambassador. Good to see you back on the program.
Dobry wieczór.
Dobry wieczór. So, according to the latest information, we have further Russian offensive. We have north of the town of Pokrovsk being taken by small Russian forces. And as that is happening, we are ahead of the meeting that I just mentioned, the Wednesday summit, and the meeting supposed to take place in Alaska between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. European and Ukrainian leaders, do you think that they should feel hopeful about the impact they would have on President Trump ahead of the meeting with Vladimir Putin? Are they going to have enough influence on the shape of the negotiations? What's your opinion?
I'm glad that Vice President Vance met with European leaders to discuss Ukraine. He did so in London. I'm glad that President Trump is scheduled to speak with European leaders. European input is important. The key European countries, UK, France, Germany, Poland, Italy, have a strong position on Ukraine, one informed by an understanding of the Russians. The American administration can benefit from the European advice on this one. Now, whether Trump takes that advice, I can't say, but I'm feeling somewhat more hopeful about the Trump administration's position going into the Alaska talks because they're starting to walk back their expectations. My theory is that the Trump people settled on this meeting with Putin thinking that Putin was ready to deal. I don't think Putin is ready to deal. I think that the special envoy, Mr. Witkoff, misinterpreted what Putin told him, or Putin was deliberately obscure. But in any event, the Americans, instead of doubling down, are becoming more cautious about their expectations. So I think the chances of a catastrophe in Alaska are lower than they were. And I think the possibility does exist of a decent outcome if, but only if, the Americans make it clear, Trump makes it clear to Putin, that we're prepared to put much more pressure on Russia and work with the Europeans to back Ukraine. Now, that's possible. And I'm not saying we'll get there, but it is possible to have a decent outcome to this meeting if the Americans approach Putin from a position of strength, which I think we've got. You mentioned Russian gains on the ground in eastern Ukraine. This is true, but we've heard stories like this for well over a year. Gains have not yet led to a breakthrough. And the cost to the Russians is high. Mm-hmm. We can put more pressure on the Russian economy. We can ramp up the flow of arms to Ukraine. And if we do,
but are we going to put more pressure?
Have to settle the war.
Do you think that the U.S. is actually going to commit to putting more pressure? Because you mentioned that these games have been going on, these games by Russia on the eastern Ukrainian front have been going on for quite some time already. But considering that there are sanctions, there are secondary sanctions, and there are these talks taking place, we would expect Vladimir Putin to actually halt and say, this is not the moment to be playing these games. Do you think that the U.S. is going to put even more pressure?
Well, you're asking the right question. The fact is, I don't know. Trump has tiptoed up to the line of actually putting more pressure on Russia, and then he always walks it back. Last Friday, the 8th, was supposed to be a deadline for more pressure. We let that slip. Trump has been criticizing Zelensky more. That's unfortunate. So I hope that Trump will realize that the way to win this one is to squeeze Putin hard, working with Europe. We have the ability to do so. There's more we can do to reduce Russian income from its sales of oil. Mm-hmm. If we do that, the Russian economy will hurt. We can do more to send more weapons to Ukraine. We can make it clear to Putin that his assessment of our weakness is mistaken. The Kremlin, as George Kennan wrote many years ago, is impervious to the logic of reason, but it is highly sensitive to the logic of force. And I think Poles would generally agree. Start the conversation with the Russians by showing that you have the strength to push them back, and do it. Do it. That's the way to get the best possible deal for Ukraine and for us all.
This is exactly what I had a conversation about with Ivana Stratner last night, when she said the West is actually starting to understand the language the Kremlin speaks. And this is going to get us closer to turning that corner. Donald Trump is a man of a certain self-confidence. What do you think would have to happen on Friday for him to for Vladimir Putin to actually push him over the line and possibly get him even closer, get Mr. Trump closer to Ukraine?
It's pretty clear that Putin is a master of obfuscation. He can be very charming. He can throw at you facts and figures which are all wrong, but he will try to dominate the conversation and run out the clock. I think that Trump should be very direct with Putin and should tell him that the time for games is over, the time to settle is now, and that we're not interested in a long explanation of the 17th century about Russia and Ukraine. We want the war ended, and if Putin doesn't do it the easy way, we will do it the hard way. We will squeeze the Russian economy and support Ukraine. I think he has to be blunt and direct with Putin.
But do you think that words are enough, or are we going to see some other movements take place after Friday?
Putin will be most unimpressed by words alone, so we have to be prepared to take those steps. We have the ability to put more pressure on Russia. This is not impossible. It isn't even that hard. We know what the options are. We need to exercise them. We need to start the conversation by putting pressure on Russia and then see if the Russians are in a more reasonable frame of mind.
Mm-hmm. We've heard from President Trump about the territorial concessions. He said that something's got to give and both sides will have to give up something. We also heard that during the Sunday interview of Vice President J.D. Vance. What kind of concessions are we talking about? What could possibly be in the cards?
Well, there is a very big difference between recognizing a front line as an existing reality and formally, officially recognizing annexation. You probably recall the U.S. position about the Soviet illegal occupation of the Baltic states. We recognized it as reality, but we never recognized it formally. We refused to recognize Soviet incorporation of the Baltic states. And we ought to refuse to recognize officially any territorial concessions to Russia. Now, that existing line can be like the line between East Germany and West Germany during the Cold War, a line we recognize as reality, but not formally. There's a big difference. And diplomats, I used to be one, are paid to find the words to bridge these kinds of gaps. And if Putin won't like it, of course, he wants us formally to recognize new international borders for Ukraine, we ought to just refuse. So there is some space for a deal. Now that the front line can be adjusted one way or another. But the point is we should not, unless the Ukrainians agree to it, we should not recognize new international borders created by force.
This is the talk about the territorial concessions, about the borders, but Putin has publicly demanded that Ukraine renounce NATO membership, something that we've covered extensively here on TVP World, a possibility of Ukraine one day joining the NATO. Is the upcoming meeting in Alaska going to curb Ukraine's hopes for the membership once and for all?
Well, President Trump should in no way give Putin an undeserved concession by saying Ukraine can never join NATO. Now, I think Ukraine ought to be in NATO. I think NATO defending Ukraine is a lot more practical than I would have thought 15 years ago, because Ukraine has managed pretty much on its own to defend itself. But look, if that is not possible for now, don't give Putin a promise, but simply find other ways to help Ukraine maintain its security after a settlement. Now, the British-French-led coalition of the willing has said, in principle, they're willing to send forces into Ukraine. Now, I don't think a couple of brigades are going to make that much difference, but I think, let's say, serious air defense units, training units, and other kinds of units in Ukraine would make Putin think twice before he started the war again.
Obviously.
So there are things we can do to support Ukraine's security, and we ought to do it.
I mean, all of these units do send a clear signal that there are eyes on Ukraine. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining me. It's always a pleasure to have you on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Daniel Fried, former U.S. ambassador to Poland, was my guest. And so this would be all for now. I'm Klaudia Czerwinska, and you were watching World News Tonight. I do hope to see you back here tomorrow at 8 p.m. CET for another program.